amount of questions, and we will endeavour to get to as many as we possibly can, just flagging that it might not be possible to get to them all. If you are joining us on LinkedIn, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer your questions live, but if you put them in the chat, we will try and get back to you after the webinar. Finally, we will be posting in the chat during the webinar call to action, so that if you are interested in either getting involved either by funding and pledging orchards or by planting some of our community orchards, the steps will be shown to you there, so you can follow that. So without further ado, I will hand over to our moderator for this afternoon, Michelle Wallace.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you to the team there who set all this up and got this ready. So even before we start, we'll come back and thank you at the end again, but incredible job to even get here today. And thank you to everybody and welcome to you all. So even by being on this webinar and taking the time out of your day to hear what my wonderful guests have to say, you're doing a good thing. Why? Because at the end of this, you're going to be more aware of the plight of bees in Ireland, what your company can do about it, what you can do about it, and you're going to understand that you can make a difference and a real change. Now, it does come with a trigger warning. This webinar will change behavior. It'll cause bouts of anger. I've had complaints from people who've been given out about, you know, the anger they feel when they see people spraying pesticides or cutting their grass too short. So please, to manage that, if you download the DCs for Bees Pollinator plan for ideas on how better to spread awareness and influence and take positive action to help save the bees, do that. So let's kick off. So at Hosting Ireland, everything here is about community, our own data ecosystem community and the wider community in which we live and we work. If I was in a physical room right now, I'd ask you to look around at all of the people, the faces of the other, what have we got, 128 people here in the room. And I'd be saying, imagine the difference that we can make together, because everyone here on this webinar is making a concerted effort. And if we can help provide the right tools to do the right thing through our pollinator plan and through today, the launch of our orchards in the community, we will make a difference. So for bees, for biodiversity, for our future, for our kids, thank you so much for joining us here today. And as I said, we're publicly launching the orchards in the community. We've launched it in our partner base and with some close contacts up to now, but we're absolutely delighted to be launching it. It's a key pillar in our DCs for Bees initiative. And DCs for Bees, just in case you're not familiar with it, there are four key pillars. One is our difference days, where we go out and try and make a viable difference on one day to the environment. Two is our DCs for Bees ambassadors, where these people who want to take action and create awareness come together once a month to share ideas and come up with initiatives and take action together to make a greater difference within their organizations, within their communities. We also have, of course, the Pollinator plan, which is a DCs for Bees industry-specific pollinator plan, perched on top of the wonderful work that Dr. Una Fitzpatrick and her team have done in creating the National Pollinator Plan. And you can sign up for that, of course. There are directions in the chat, which you'll be able to see, and how to sign up for it. And all it is a list of actions for you to take, for you to be like a toolkit that you can use to do the right thing. And then finally today, we're launching our orchards. And we're going to find out a little more about why orchards are so key from Una. But in the meantime, let me just say that they're like really important. And we'll find out a bit more about that. Una, when we sat down with you 2 years ago and asked you what's the most and best effective thing to do with our community of people, you said orchards all over the country, not just for bees, but for biodiversity in general. They help people connect with nature and our food sources. They help us develop an understanding of the critical relationship that we have with our environment. So with that in mind, we went about thinking how we could come together. We picked a big number that we thought was a ridiculous stretch. So, you know, myself and Gary sat down, we said, right, what about 1,000? Like 1,000 would be incredible. And we said, it's going to be very hard to reach 1,000 though. You know, maybe it'll take us a year, or maybe that's a 3-year goal. And each of those orchards have 5 fruit trees suitable for all soils, urban gardens and all the rest. So I'm beyond thrilled to announce that as of this morning, we have topped 1,200 orchards. Like, it's amazing. 50 companies from our partners and others who wanted to get involved have come together to pledge all of these orchards. So some of them our pledgers will take and they'll plant on their land. Some are working with their employees and they're working with their communities to you know, to place those orchards, like the likes of Eversheds who are working with Barrettstown to place all their orchards there. And then others are pledging their orchards into a community pot, where we'll look to partner with community groups who will be able to plant those orchards within communities. So this is not just about, you know, the wider community or the Hosting Ireland community. It's about all of that. It's about how communities can come together to make a real difference. So before I kick off and chat with my guests, I want to sincerely thank all of you that came behind us and supported this great initiative. If anyone else wants to get involved in the programme, either by pledging orchards or expressing an interest in taking orchards from the community pot for their own community, let us know. All you have to do is email marketing@hostingireland.com and you know, just let us know it's about the orchards, and we'll get back to you when we sift through all the messages and requests that we get. So with me today, I have Katie Mills, who's Head of Sustainable Development and Innovation in the UK and Ireland for Schneider Electric. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you.
I have Peter Dowdall, the Irish gardener, which you may have seen and may be famous from RTE and The Examiner as well. You're their gardening correspondent. Hi, Peter.
Hi all, hi everybody. Infamous, I think, more than famous.
Yeah. Well, that remains to be seen. Yeah, you have an hour to prove yourself now, Peter. And then, of course, we have Una, who's the co-founder of the National Pollinator Plan. And over the next hour or so, we'll be looking at what's the big deal with orchards, how businesses, communities and people are getting involved, and what you can do to take action to halt the decline of bees in Ireland. So Una, I introduced you last because I'm actually going to start with you. You're co-author and custodian of the National Pollinator Plan, and you're senior ecologist at the National Biodiversity Datacentre. So it's literally your job to track the health of biodiversity in Ireland. So I shouldn't be smiling for this, but let's start with the bad news. Where are we? What's happening? What's going on with bees these days?
Thanks, Michelle. It's lovely to be with you. Yeah, you're right. So I work in the National Biodiversity Datacentre, and we track changes in Ireland's wildlife. So a wee bit like the Central Statistics Office, but for plant and animal information. And unfortunately, you know, as I think we all know, biodiversity loss is a huge problem at the minute. Bees are no different. So in Ireland, we've got 99 different kinds of bees. There's the honeybee, which is doing okay, but then there are 98 wild bees, so 21 bumblebees and 77 different types of solitary bee. And unfortunately, 1/3 of those are threatened with extinction. So, you know, really serious issues. And as you mentioned, the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, it was set up in 2015 to try and address this. You know, you can only watch a problem happen for so long before I think you have to try and step up and do something about it. So the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan was set up. It has a steering group, an All-Ireland steering group, and implementation is coordinated by the National Biodiversity Datacentre. And really what it's trying to do is take action to change things, you know, to improve the lot for pollinators. And the beauty of doing that is that you also improve things for biodiversity, because pollinators are so crucial within the environment. When you can protect pollinators, you're protecting a much, much wider swathe of all our biodiversity. So really, you know, the Pollinator Plan, it's a call to action. It really is, you know, and everyone can help. And I've said this before, anyone who has any responsibility for a piece of land, from the smallest window box to the biggest farm, you know, to the biggest business property, everyone can help. And there's so many simple actions that we can all take. And what we've tried to do within the Pollinator Plan is to identify these evidence-based actions to help. And we make all these freely available at pollinators.ie. So there's guidelines there for what you can do if you're a business, a council, a local community, you know, a gardener. So that's all freely available on the website. And, you know, it comes back to the problem. People say, well, why are bees and other biodiversity in such trouble? And with bees, really, the key driver is hunger. You know, there's simply not enough flowers in the landscape for them to survive anymore. And often people are surprised to know that our wild bees, so most of our bees, 98 of the 99, are wild bees. They don't make honey like honeybees. So they have no way of storing food. So it's true to say they're never more than a few days away from starvation. So it's really important that there's this continual source of flowers in the landscape for them to feed on throughout their life cycle, from spring through into the autumn. So the challenge then comes back to, well, how do you start providing that food? You know, and there's various ways to do it. And this is where we interacted. Again, we've interacted a few times now. I know that yourself and Gary came down, or we had a meeting, and DCs for Bees, you know, had been really successful, and you wanted a new project. And we talked around various things. And again, to give you credit, each time you've done this with me, and I've suggested what I think would work best, and then you've actually done that, rather than choose what's easiest or perhaps what's most marketable or whatever. So we talked at various things, and I know that you are keen on wildflower seed, and I said, no, please don't, but orchards would be amazing. So you've gone with that, which is just incredible. And just I thought, if I can say why orchards are so important. Yeah. And you touched on it, Michelle, already, but I think, you know, there's 5 reasons for me why they're so important. The first is, you know, they're providing this really important source of food for bees in spring. Spring's a really hard time for pollinators, you know, when they come out of hibernation. And to have these flowering fruit trees, you know, there providing food for them is incredibly important. What you can also really easily do around these little mini orchards, you know, is supplement that food, whether it's a little bit of bulb planting, you know, to flower a bit earlier, you know, maybe let the grass grow around the trees later on, you know, to allow clovers and things to provide forage source afterwards. So, you know, it's a really important source of food for our pollinators. And also, it's not just for 1 year. You know, you plant in a fruit or mini orchard, that's there for decades. You know, that's there continually providing food for pollinators for such a long amount of time at relatively little effort once the orchard goes in. So that's the first reason they're so important. They're also really important, obviously, you know, it's a climate action, so it's good from that perspective. Third, and you touched on it as well, I think it's so important to provide that link to food. You know, those orchards are providing food for bees, but in pollinating, the bees are also then providing food for us in terms of, you know, the apples or the plums or whatever that you're getting back. So I think it's a really lovely circle, and it brings home to us how dependent on biodiversity we are, and how important it is to us, because we've become a wee bit detached from that. You know, so I think it's really nice with projects like this that can connect the whole circle back again for people and make them realize how important biodiversity actually is. The fourth reason really is there's such an important focal point. Really, orchards are, you know, for generation upon generation, we would have had orchards in Ireland, and they can be such a focal point, whether it's on a business site, as a focal point in a local community, even in your own garden. You know, I always remember back when I was a child, my mum's from a farm, and they used to have these old dams and plums on the farm, and, you know, we used to go every year to collect them, and as did all her brothers and sisters. You know, it's this real focal thing that connects you to the environment and to what's important. So, you know, I think that, you know, they're really important from that perspective. And lastly, I don't know if you've ever seen an apple blossom. My background's actually originally in botany rather than bees, but so I'm very fond of plants, but there are few flowers more stunning than an apple blossom. You know, so to have these orchards in your sites, you know, within communities, within business, it's an incredible thing for people, you know, to be able to experience. So if you do have an orchard, I'd recommend you put a seat beside it so people can go there and sit in spring and, you know, just admire these really gorgeous blossoms. So important. If I can make one last point, when you came to me and I was picturing, you said 1,000, to be honest, I was picturing about 100. And so I was totally amazed and shocked when you actually came back and said that there's 1,200, which is just incredible. And what this has unexpectedly in some ways let us do is create this ideal experimental design. So now that we have these 1,200 orchards across the country, it allows us to set up really nice experiments around that to track what's happening with pollinators. So we can track, you know, what's pollinating the trees in various parts of the country. But more importantly, and we've never been able to do this in Ireland before, what it's going to let us do is track pollination service. So it's much easier to see how many pollinators we have and how they're faring, but it's harder actually to track pollination service. And what you're doing with that is you're tracking whether there's sufficient pollinators in any one area to sufficiently pollinate the crops that you might have. So it's really important, but actually very, very difficult to track. And if you ever did want to track it, what you would have to do is to plant in the same trees at the same time across lots of locations around the country. So if you had to set that up as a scientific experiment, obviously really costly, but it's exactly what you're doing within this project. So we're really delighted that it's bringing this whole added new dimension to it. And hopefully, once these trees get established and they start providing fruit, we can start tracking that pollination service. It's so easy to measure that with the people who have them. All you have to do is count the number of apples. So, that's something that we can, look on into the future. So I think this partnership is only beginning, incredibly positive, and there's so much good that it's going to do. And again, really delighted that it's happened, and credit to Hosting Ireland for making that happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Una. Incredible. And I actually love that, this piece around pollination service, and, certainly that wasn't necessarily our original intention, but the fact that we're enabling that is incredible. And I was chatting to Peter Dowdall, who's now going to join our marketing department, and I was saying we want to come up with a name for this pollination service, because it's literally comparing apples to apples. So that's what Peter said. So we're going to be calling it the Apple to Apple program now from now on. But it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and thank you for that. And I love what you said there about the connection as well. I think that's so important. We've really lost that connection, with our surroundings, with nature, and we try to clean things down to such a degree that we don't let any of that back in again. And I think part of this, and even what you were saying about the pollinator plan, it is about science-based action, absolutely, and that's what we're all about in Hosting Ireland. But it's also about this mindset shift that we all need to take, both as individuals, as organizations, and communities as well. So hopefully this will enable that. Thank you, Una. Katie, as we were just talking about organizations there, I'd love you now to introduce yourself. So you're, well, I'll let you introduce yourself actually, and I won't say it.
No, thank you. Yeah, so I am Head of Innovation and Sustainable Development for the UK and Ireland for Schneider Electric. The longest job title in the world. But basically what that means is I'm very much focused on our sustainability initiatives across the zone, most importantly looking at our net zero 2030 targets. And biodiversity really for the last 6 months has become a real core pillar of our sustainability programs globally across Schneider Electric, as well as what we can do locally within the communities that we're based. So this was a great opportunity for us to be able to work locally within communities where we have significant business in Ireland, and really help us on our biodiversity journey. So yeah, very excited to be part of it.
Good, we're so excited, Katie, and like you guys have really come behind this. When we heard that you guys were coming on board, and with a kind of significant pledge towards these orchards, we were so excited. And thank you, and thanks to all of Schneider. It's fantastic in terms of kind of why you're doing it as an organization, and what it means even to the rest of Schneider, what it means within the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like even what it means to employees now, right? Like the paycheck is becoming not less, it is less important. People aren't necessarily working for the paycheck anymore. They're now really concerned about how you're operating as an organization, about the planet, and about what you're doing and the role that you take in that. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the why for us is ultimately healthy biodiversity is an essential infrastructure that supports all of us, right? Human beings, animals alike. And I think actually when we look at our biodiversity, we can actually find a lot of nature-based solutions to some of the most kind of critical problems that we're facing from an environmental, economic, and kind of social challenges. So I think it's really important that we obviously nurture and protect that. And at Schneider, we're very committed to staying to a certain extent within our planetary boundaries. And I think every organisation has a responsibility to do that. Ultimately, if we don't have healthy human life, then we don't have healthy economies and healthy businesses. So it's all interconnected and all kind of tied up in looking at this, looking at the impact, I suppose, business has on natural capital, right? And making that impact as minimal as possible. And I think, yes, you're right. People, especially, and actually not just younger generations across Schneider, every generation within the business has sustainability really at the core of what they do. It's why they work at Schneider Electric, if I'm being very honest. You know, down to the point that our pay structures are aligned to our sustainability goals. So my bonus depends on whether we hit our sustainability goals, and I think that's the way organisations are moving towards, because it now becomes an integral part of our business strategy moving forward, rather than just a kind of CSR piece that sits on the side. And I think that's really the only way we can go, right? If we need to be more resilient, and healthy biodiversity allows us to be more resilient. You know, COVID has shown that to us over the last 18 months, how resiliency is such an important part of healthy economies and healthy businesses. And I think supporting biodiversity only allows us really to become far more resilient in the future over some of the challenges that we're going to be facing as businesses, as well as, you know, working with our people on what it means for them as individuals. And we're on a few journeys actually with our people. We're about to start to roll out a program around helping our employees turn their homes into net zero homes. We've been very conscious of the fact that during the pandemic, obviously it's been great for our offices, our carbon footprint has significantly decreased, but have we just picked up that carbon footprint and put it onto our people's homes? Potentially. So we're working closely with a lot of our employees now on educating them on how we can help decarbonise homes as well. And actually, as part of the DC for Bees and the orchards, we're actually letting our employees basically apply for an orchard, and they can take one home and plant it in their garden. And we're hoping again that really connects them back to nature, also with their families. You know, hopefully they can get all different parts of their families involved when it comes to planting it. And ultimately, we have healthier and happier people within our business who wants to work on the things that are important for us as an organisation. So yeah, I think for us it's a win-win, right? There isn't a negative side to this in any shape or form.
I love that, Katie. You know, I'm kind of from the corporate side of things for very many years, and you know, CSR was sometimes, you know, or dare I say it, quite often one of these box ticking exercises. You know, it was kind of like once a year for the annual report, you pull all the information together, you know,
yeah,
of like what we can put in there. And it's like what I'm hearing from you is like you flip that on its head and actually leading from the front, like leading with your, you know, your financial bonuses are attached to your sustainability. Like that's really, really meaningful stuff, like not just from a business perspective, but it's actually how you're motivating people, how you're engaging people. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think it's about flipping the conversation. Sometimes we end up going down the track of, well, what's the ROI? And actually, that's not always the conversation. I think it's more about what's the business risk if we don't do this. And I think that's what we're seeing more of, right, is people understanding that there is risk involved as a business if you don't act upon biodiversity, on your sustainability targets, on energy efficiency, on, you know, decarbonising your operations and your supply chain. There are huge risks involved with that now. So I think, you know, as soon as you start to educate people in that way, people then don't think of it as an additional, they think of it as an essential. And that's, I think, the shift in conversation that we're starting to see now, which is fantastic.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. And thanks again to Schneider and all the Schneider employees, and to, you know, the rest of our partners who are just so behind this, and you speak with such passion about it. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been fabulous to be involved. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I see there's some questions coming in here, so keep them coming in. Just a reminder for the people who are watching the webinar at the moment, you can upvote some of those questions. So if there's questions that you see in the Q&A session at the bottom of Zoom, you can click on the little thumbs up and you can upvote questions if you particularly want to see some of those answered. So I just wanted to remind you of that before we go to yourself, Peter. So you are our celebrity gardener here today.
Well, hello, Tanya. I feel like a bit of an imposter more than that, but hello, hello, Michelle, and hello to everybody. And I suppose in the first instance, I'm just so chuffed and so delighted to be invited to be part of what you're doing, because as Gary mentioned before we came on here, today is Bloomsday, so hopefully Bloomsday will become a more auspicious date in the calendar from now on, because I really feel that that this could be a red letter day for biodiversity in Ireland. And I don't mean that to be just throwing out headlines and catchphrases like, but if we can develop, or if we can facilitate the development of 1,200 and counting orchards within Ireland, and with the great work that Una and the National Biodiversity Centre are doing and will do with the pollinator servicing, and it's just such an opportunity to actually make a substantial difference here. So hopefully today will be remembered not just in terms of Ulysses, but from now on in terms of orchards as well. And I suppose a couple of people have alluded to it already, but I think perhaps the greatest, if not the only positive to come out of the last 15 or 16 months of what we've had with COVID has been a newfound and deeper appreciation of what is all around us, be it our own private green space, the green environment, the great outdoors, and a capital G for that, the great outdoors, whatever you want to call it. We have developed, more people, if you like, have developed a greater appreciation of it. And Katie, I think you alluded to this too, it does hold the answers to so many of our modern day problems, right? And in what has perhaps up to now, gardening, if you like, been kind of looked at and maybe dismissed as a kind of a nice hobby for maybe the more genteel and the more older amongst us, right? Whereas in fact, it holds so many solutions. And I often think that if one of the new tech, or if one of the big multinational tech companies were to introduce a new gadget that would take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, well, we would have such razzmatazz over it, and they'd be selling it for millions worldwide, but we have them already. They're called trees. We have them. So we need to put more value on this green environment and whatever we want to call it. It offers solutions in terms of reducing the rate of species extinction, mitigating the effects of climate change, obvious mental health benefits, which they say have been highlighted very much so over the last 15 or 16 months. And of course, our physical health, you can cancel the gym membership if you want to go working in the garden or go planting an orchard. It's your closest gym, if you like, and it's free. And nature, I suppose, it's all about connections. It's a tapestry. We've all heard the phrase, nature's rich tapestry, and it is a tapestry, and it's all about connections and symbiotic relationships and things going on, which again is another reason why I love what we're doing here, because it is all about connections. And when we hear the on the television news and these huge facts and figures about how much species extinction is, we're witnessing, I think it is the quickest rate of species extinction that we've seen, and I think I'm right in saying 400 million years. It's just, it's mind-boggling, and I mean that it literally is mind-boggling. And we kind of think, well, it's futile on me trying to do anything about that because I can't. But it's not, because it's individual change is what's going to make the difference. And when we're talking about the corporates, and yes, there is risk involved in not getting involved, and the risk is because we will all cease to exist, so there will be no businesses. I mean, that is the ultimate end game here if we don't stop now, and if we don't, as you say, move CSR from a kind of box ticking exercise to the most important thing in every business. We all need. Obviously, when you think about it, the environment isn't just something for the Greens. The environment is where we all live, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink. This is our environment. And we have to be cognizant of keeping it clean and keeping it healthy. Or else all this is we're just wasting our time. So on a corporate level, that's all very important. But then as an individual level, every one of us is part of the jigsaw. And yes, we mightn't be able to save the rainforest in Brazil as an individual, but we can do one thing, and that is help the bee, right? And helping the bee, and I've heard Una say this at some of the talks that I've been to, that she's asked, the bee is the ultimate, because the bee will pollinate the plant, which will develop into a tree, which will home the bird, for the bird to build the nest, and there's maybe a couple of thousand species living and feeding off the tree. So just helping that bee is probably the most important thing we can do. And I think we need to do that in three ways. We need to recalibrate as individuals. We need to recalibrate what we see as beautiful. So roadside verges that have been sprayed with weed killer, or the edge of your lawn that has been sprayed with weed killer to keep it clean. That's not clean. That's not beautiful. A roadside verge that is full of oxeye daisies and wildflowers, that's beautiful. And that's sustaining the bees, and that's creating the corridors. So in the first instance, I think we need to reimagine what is beautiful and, you know, recalibrate ourselves. We also then need to make ourselves aware, and I think you mentioned at the start, Michelle, that, you know, it can lead to kind of tempers fraying when they see people out spraying weed killers and things. And of course, we should get angry. We have to get angry when we see the wrong thing being done. But at the same time, we have to be careful that there are many different approaches to this. So not everybody in suburban Ireland wants to leave their garden be rewilded. So they have to educate themselves. I just nipped off to the garden centre yesterday when I knew I was coming on this, just to see that when you're in the garden centre, it's important that you choose the right plants, right? You may not want a wildflower meadow. You may want a nice ornamental garden, but just be careful. So if you go for something like this, I'll hold it up to the camera, that's a, you know, a double flowering tuberous begonia. It looks stunning and you'll see it in window boxes and that all over the country. Useless, the bees. Too difficult. It's useless. There's nothing in there for it apart from all the ruffled petals. Go for much more simple flowers, something like that. Marguerite, Argyranthemum, very, very simple flower. The bees can land in it and get the pollen and get the nectar out of it. A much better thing to be using. So to go for simple flowers, that's a lavender, another one loved by pollinators. Okay, the bees and the butterflies will fly all over that. So your garden will be every bit as beautiful, but just pollinator friendly. Just be careful. And of course, your garden then really becomes a living entity because there's butterflies and bees, and you know, you're having a natural experience as opposed to just looking at something sterile. You're in the middle of this natural oasis. And the last thing to do, because I'm conscious of your time, is we have to stop using chemicals. All too often I'm asked, you know, how can I put in something to help the bees, like wildflower seed and bug hotels and all this kind of thing, and you're giving advice, and then the very next question from the same person might be, what's wrong with my rose? I sprayed rose clear or a chemical on it to get rid of the green fly, but I still got the green fly. Stop using chemicals, because it's all good gardening. I'll leave you on this. The secret to having a nice, good, healthy garden is the natural balance, maintaining the natural balance. And what that means is if you ensure a rich diversity of species within your garden of both plant species and wildlife species, you will prevent the unnatural buildup of any one single species. So if there's one thing to take away from what I'm saying, it's please try and maintain the natural balance in your garden.
That's really interesting, Peter. Thank you so much. There is actually a question in here that I want to ask you because it's very specific to what you've just said. And it's kind of like, if not pesticides, then what? My roses have black spot. I think I know who asked this question. I usually spray them, but what should I do instead of using sprays and pesticides?
Well, the first thing to do in terms of well, before you go to the black spot, if you look at things like herbicides and weed killers and that, just remember that pre-World War II, there were no garden chemicals. And look at the gardens that they had, right? So instead of weed killers, hand weeding, go out, use trowels. As I say, get rid of the gym membership, go out, get the mental health benefits, get the physical health benefits. Don't be scared of it. In terms of pesticides, when you're looking at black spot, now black spot is a fungal infection, okay? So always the best thing to do when a plant has a fungal infection is what we term cultural control. So cultural control just quite simply means going out with the secateurs and nipping off the infected growth in the first instance, okay? Very often by creating good air circulation around a rose bush, and you do that by pruning to make sure that it's not congested in the inside. So ensuring good air circulation around that plant and removing infected growth, that will all help in the prevention of the fungal infection in the first place. And then you can treat it with something like copper sulfate mixed with water. Now, copper sulfate is certified for use in organic farming, organic agriculture, but please do be careful if you're using it. Only use, I know a lot of the websites and textbooks will say use it 3 and 4 times a year to prevent plate blight. Don't. Use it, I would say, maximum of once a year. Very, very effective, but much better as a preventative as opposed to a cure when it gets it. But it's all about cultural control. So there are alternatives to pesticides, other pesticides like insecticides. So if you have your green fly, look at things like there's a product range, it's an English range called Grazers, where they have a calcium-based product for different pests, if you like. So what you're doing is helping the plants to help themselves. You're not killing any green fly, and as a result of not killing the green fly, you're leaving a healthy population for their predators, which in that case would be ladybirds, right? So by treating it with something like Grazers or maybe a garlic wash, you're making the plant completely unpalatable to the aphid, but you're not interfering with that natural balance.
Excellent, thank you. And something you've touched on there, Peter, and Una touched on it before. There's this thing in communications, right, where you if you're writing something, you think, right, would a 5-year-old understand this? And I feel like for biodiversity, it's like, what would your granny do? Because it's kind of going back to the old ways of working. Like, you know, our grannies and granddads probably used a lot of these methods and hacks that we've just kind of lost touch with now.
Michelle, can I interrupt for 1 second? I say we need to put that the other way around, because I remember once doing a little class for 5 and 6-year-old kids and showing them some bulbs and letting them plant them in pots, right? And they all did it and it was all fine. I was giving a talk that evening to adults and I said, I'm going to try something here. And I gave them all the bulb and asked them all to plant it. I would say at least half of them asked me which way is up. None of the children did. So I would say when it comes to biodiversity and gardening, the 5-year-old gets it because it's innate within all of us as small children. But as we grow up, we become fearful, we become, you know, so ask yourself the question, will my daddy get this?
Yeah. Great. Right, we've loads of questions here now, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. Just a reminder to all our attendees, if you can upvote the questions that you want answered, that's the best way to approach it, because we won't get through them all, but we will try our very best. So the first question from James, great chat. I'm a new beekeeper. My colony have suffered heavy losses via Roundup use. I'm asking neighbours not to use it, but are there any bee-friendly alternative to remove green and black fly I could recommend them to use instead of the dreaded Roundup? So I think you've kind of covered that, Peter. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Not really, just particularly in terms of time, not really. Yeah, unfortunately people will still use weed killers, but weed killers aren't going to work on green fly and black fly anyway, so it's even more futile. Right.
Okay. So definitely get them to stop using it. So it's one of our questions from our LinkedIn Live viewers. How can we get an orchard? How can we get an orchard for our community? So I'm going to answer that one, Patricia. If you email, if you're part of a community group and that community group is interested in, you know, dipping into our community pot, lots of our pledgers have committed to orchards that they're not actually going to take for their own land. They may not have land or whatever it is, but they're just pledging that support. You can email marketing@hostionireland.com and we'll get back to you on with instructions, or you know what the process will be. So just email marketing@hostionireland for anybody who's interested, and we'll get back to you in due course. Sorry, Patricia Kane, would love to hear what are your top 3 actions when creating a really good orchard, big or small? Una or Peter, who'd like to go for that? Or Katie, if you want to jump in there on what creates a great orchard.
Yeah, I feel that's an Una speciality. Yeah, I know what I would like, but doesn't necessarily mean it makes a great orchard. So Una, I'm passing the baton.
Thanks, Katie. I think the 3 things that are most important are to plant the trees together together, so that you get that real focal point of it. So it really feels like an orchard and it's somewhere that you can go and really experience and enjoy. I think I touched on this before. I think, you know, these trees are providing such an important food source for pollinators in spring, but you can then supplement that and also, you know, enhance the orchard itself. So maybe putting in some bulb planting, things like crocus, which flower really early in spring, you know, to provide that food source for the pollinators before the apple blossoms. And then to let the grass grow maybe a bit longer after the apples flower, you know, this time of year. So, you know, late May, June, things like clover will pop up, incredibly important food source. So the orchard's providing this, you know, steady stream of food for pollinators right throughout their season. And also, you know, a lovely place, you know, to visit as a human.
Lovely, thanks, Una. We actually, as part of this initiative, we went to a beautiful orchard out in Slane called the Cider Mill. They make lovely ciders, a range of ciders, Cockagee cider and Love Oak cider, all these beautiful ciders. And actually they have all wildflower meadow in between all of the trees. So, you know, it doesn't have that kind of nice, neat orchard look that you might be used to in the stock photos. But it was just stunning. Buttercup and all sorts of things popping up between the orchard trees. It's beautiful. Another question for you, Una, from Ken, wondering if Una is against wildflowers. So I think this is a good one to tackle here, because you told us not to, you stopped us. Poor El Gary had this, you know, billion seed plan. He said, is it just a preference for orchards over wildflowers? So what is it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks. So a big part of the problem around biodiversity loss is the loss of these flower-rich meadows right across the whole Irish landscape. And it's partly due to change in farming practice, but it's also because of the way we now tidy up the landscape. So now we mow grass, you know, to within an inch of its life. So if you were to reduce mowing, so if you adopt a don't mow, let it grow approach, these habitats, this incredibly important, you know, semi-natural, species-rich grassland habitat can return. You can do it in your garden. You know, I've stopped mowing the front of my garden. Amazing wildflowers have naturally popped up. Anyone can do it everywhere, and we need lots more of it. If we did that, that's an incredibly important biodiversity action. What you get are these natural meadows. They're there for the long term. They're providing exactly the wildflowers that pollinators have evolved with and that they want. Pollinators, they don't want fancy things. They don't want really gaudy flowers. They want the really simple stuff. So that's the dandelions, the clovers, the birdsfoot trefoil, you know, the little self-heal. These are things that are in the seed bank. We just have to let them grow again. So that's what we strongly advocate within the pollinator plan, this don't mow, let it grow approach. Plant and wildflower seed is a wee bit different. So when you buy a packet of wildflower seed, you're getting this mix that's of various different flowers that have been put into the packet, and they're usually really colorful. You know, they wouldn't necessarily naturally grow together in the wild. So what you're planting is a really colorful flower bed, essentially. Now that's a horticultural action. You know, it's different. It's not necessarily a biodiversity action. And we really, within the pollinator plan, just want to stress that one, don't mow, let it grow is a biodiversity action. That's what we strongly recommend. Plant and wildflower seed is more of a horticultural action. So by all means, you know, do it in your garden if you want to, but please, we always say, don't do it outside your garden, and don't be tempted, you know, to do it in along roadsides, which if you just allowed natural regeneration, will produce these amazing natural meadows, which is exactly what we need. If I just tell one anecdote, in Middleton, they developed a Middleton town pollinator plan. And so they decided to reduce mowing along lots of the verges. And they'd obviously been mowing, you know, really tightly for decades. And in the first year that they did it, over 300 bee orchids popped up in these areas where they'd reduced mowing for the first time. Now, these are natural, amazing plants, you know, and it's that what we need to return to. We need to let the things that are naturally there come back and allow these natural meadows to regenerate. I always kind of break out in a cold sweat if I picture Middleton having planted out, throwing out wildflower seed on that. You know, you get these gaudy stuff. They're lovely, but you know, I suppose you get these really colorful things that wouldn't be natural in Middleton popping up instead. So I think you have to be careful about what you're doing. So if you do want to plant wildflower seed, please just keep it in your garden and don't mow, let it grow where you can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We have so many questions. I don't think we're going to get through them all. So I'm going to try and do like a quick fire round of questions, see how many we can get through. This is like just a minute quiz. You know, for Katie, this is a program that's on Irish radio. I don't even know if it's still on anymore. We ask so many questions in a minute. So we see how many we get through. So Amy Duke has asked, one thing that stood out from the last webinar was that wasps are pollinators. I always had it in my head that wasps were the annoying pest cousin of a bee. So if they pollinate also, is there a reason why we all hate them so much?
Because they sting us. There is a reason, yes. That's not to say they're not beneficial pollinators.
And I just say wasps do a wee bit of pollination, but the really important thing about wasps is that they're predators. So they're much more involved in pest control. So if we didn't have wasps, we'd have a lot more insects that we really don't like.
So there you go. There's your pesticide alternative, is leave the owl wasps alone. They're doing a job for you, actually. Una, I have to ask you, you do this great analogy of a bee or of a wasp, and you know how they're around all year or all season, and they only get annoying at the end. Can you give us that?
I can, but don't be cross because we're doing the 1 minute answers.
No, I know.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you a minute. Go on. because it's just too good.
Okay, I'll just explain. So bees are, I always think of bees are vegetarian, so they're totally focused on feeding their young pollen. Wasps are different, so they collect little insects to bring back to feed their young in the nest. And wasps are amazing. So the adult wasps collect these little tiny insects, flies and whatever they can find, and they bring it back to feed the larvae in the nest. And in return, those larvae actually exude this sugar solution from their bodies, which feeds the adult wasp. So it's this exchange, so the adults are feeding the young, and in return the young are feeding the adults. What happens is when that last nest develops, there's no more young in the nest. This happens around September, usually when kids are going back to school. So what's happening is those wasps that bother us around September sort of time, there's no more young left in the nest because it's the last generation of the year. They're starving. So that's why they're bothering you. They're not being fed by the larvae anymore, who aren't exuding the sugar solution. So they are trying to get your Coke or your jam or whatever sugary thing it is that they think that you might have. So you have to feel a wee bit sorry for those wasps. It's just that they're starving.
And they're also feeding on the fermenting fruit, right? They're also a little bit drunk.
Yeah, that's true.
They're a little bit drunk, that's why most people get annoying. So I've got empathy for them. Question from George: what about cherry trees? Are they also good for bees? I mean, the fruiting variety and not the ornamental cherry.
All cherry trees are good for bees. Yeah, really good. Actually, sometimes people ask me this is because you can't see the bees, because often cherry trees are quite high, but if you look closely, there will be lots of bees on a cherry.
Okay, super. Sharon, I have a question for Una. My children are mad about growing apple trees from apple seeds, pink lady apples. What are the chances of ever getting fruit from these saplings? Should we go and buy trees from nurseries instead?
I think that's a lovely thing to do, and I'm not going to give my age away, but over 30 years ago I did this exact thing, and that tree is now in my parents' garden at home, and it produces fruit. So by all means give that a go. Yeah, it's a really nice thing to do. It's obviously, your chance of success, you don't know what'll happen, but it's a really lovely thing to try.
Oh, lovely. Peter, any tips on what, so they're saying pink lady apples, any tips on maybe the most successful apple that might grow? Best chance?
The interesting thing, I agree with Una. I don't agree with it that I could have sympathy for the semi-drunk wasp, but apart from that, I agree with it that it's a lovely thing to do, to take the apple pips out and give them a go. But it's important to remember they won't come true to type. So if you plant a green or pink lady pip, you won't have necessarily a pink lady apple. They tend to be grafted onto rootstocks, which are grown from seed. So it is a lovely thing to do, and you will have an apple tree. It could be a crab apple or it could be an edible apple, but I'm afraid it probably won't be a pink lady. But certainly, absolutely give it a go. Gotcha.
Okay. Do all the trees have to be planted in the same area? Can some be in the front garden and some be in the back garden of our centre? So this is a question from Jackie. I'm taking it she means, that set of 5 orchard trees. Do they have to be kind of within the same, small space, or can they be spread somewhat? Maybe how far can they be spread to be considered still an orchard? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll answer that one by saying, again, it's the bees will pollinate. So the bee will fly into the flower of one apple tree. They feed on the nectar, and then they get pollen all over them. And again, as Una was mentioning, it's the solitary bees, in fact, who don't make the honey. They're the less efficient, if you like, at collecting. So they'll drop a lot of the pollen then when they fly into the next apple tree, right? It's the honeybees are very, very efficient collectors, so they're not necessarily the best for pollinating. So provided the trees are within flying distance, if you like, I would probably like to have them all within the same area. You need to, depending on the size of the tree, you're going to need to leave enough space for that tree to mature in size of width and that. But I mean, certainly you don't have to be out there with the tape measure to make sure that it's within 20 feet or 30 feet. And if it is front and back garden, chances are you'll be okay, but it would be much better to have them all within the one area without giving a specific measurement. I mean, if they're 50, 60 feet away, that'll still be fine,
Okay, yeah, gotcha. So if you live on a grand estate and you've got a very large back garden, very large front garden, maybe put them all in one spot. But if you're in a smaller garden, you might be all right. I know the instructions around our particular orchards is that they should be kind of 2 to 3 meters apart, is kind of about right.
Michelle, on that note, I'm going to wave bye-bye and thank you all.
Thank you, Peter. Take care. Great stuff. And then we've got another one here. We're part of the Community Biodiversity Enhancement Plan in Kilkee in Clare. We'd like to plant a few dwarf apple trees as part of our project, but need some recommendations for a variety that might survive. There is a shelter belt. Actually, Mary Redmond, I don't know, Una, if you've got specific recommendations there, but Mary, what we'll actually do is we will send you the list of apples that we're using for these orchards. They're very versatile. You know, they work in lots of different environments, very suitable for urban gardens. So I might ask Tanya or Mira to answer that in the type answer there, and we'll get you those answers. Now, Peter's gone, he's getting vaccinated, but there's a question here for Peter on how do you make a garlic wash? Don't know if anybody's got any tips for that in Peter's absence.
Afraid not.
Sorry about that, Patricia. We've missed the boat on that one. Let me see. Can small businesses without physical offices to plant at or a CSR budget to fund orchards do anything to make their business models or business practices more pollinator friendly? So it's a great question. And that's from Joseph.
I think just from kind of I appreciate we're a much bigger organisation, but we work with a lot of SMEs actually as part of our supply chain, and we're always looking at how we can work with them to support them on sustainability initiatives, including biodiversity. I think look where you're based and look in your local community, right? There are always projects that you can volunteer for in your local community to help restore the environment around you. And that's free. You don't have to spend, you don't have to have a huge CSR budget to be able to do that. So I think, you know, starting small always helps. Also look at your own employees. How can you help your own employees be more pollinator friendly? You know, is it that you fund, I don't know, some form of greenery that you give them and they can plant it in their garden, or they can have it on their balcony, you know, in any shape or form. Doesn't have to cost huge amounts of money. And, you know, please correct me if I'm wrong on these, but it doesn't have to cost huge amounts of money for you to have some form of impact. Just got to get a little bit creative sometimes, I think, outside the box, and tag on to what other people are doing. You know, go and add manpower to projects, and give your people time to volunteer and go out into the communities and be working with communities. There's always lots of opportunities for you to be able to really do things without being on massive budgets.
Love that, Katie. Thank you so much. And actually the pollinator plan, have a look at that as well. You know, there's a lot in there that you can use, and certainly, you know, a lot of what Katie's covered is, you know, they're the kinds of things that are in there. You don't need to own land. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you for that question, Joseph. Are there commercially available bee bombs seed packs any good? I got a present of 2 of them and was thinking of planting them. That's from Dermot.
No. Plants go to a huge amount of effort to disperse seeds. You know, they've all sorts of ingenious ways of doing it. So the idea of cramming them all into like a wee bomb like that and expecting them to grow makes no sense whatsoever, to be totally honest. So I can understand that they're a lovely gift to give to people, but as an action, as an evidence-based action that helps pollinators, no. But I mean, if you've already received them, by all means, you know, I would put them into a pot, you know, on a patio or outside your front door and see what happens. But I wouldn't buy any more. I wouldn't give them to anyone else as a gift personally.
Is there something as an alternative that's, you know, as a gift, if you wanted to give it to people, that's, you know, related around biodiversity?
Yeah.
What could you do? You could give them a hammer to smash their lawnmower. Anything more creative than that? You
could, you know, there's other seeds that you can give, and it comes back into this. People really like this idea of bee bombs or of wildflower packets of seed, but there are other things you can do. You know, you could give someone bulbs, and things like crocus bulbs are amazing for pollinators because they flower, you know, at a time when they're really hungry. You could give other seeds, you know, that maybe sunflowers, or there's lots of phacelia and lots of seeds that are really good, really easy to grow, you know, and more reliable and will definitely provide food. And, you know, no one's pretending that they're native or not. Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Una. Really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much, Katie, as well. We're heading to the last few minutes. So Gary here is lurking in the background. I know you'd love to have a few words. Just a quick message just on our Q&As. There's so many in there. I'm so sorry we didn't get to them all. Some lovely people have put in some directions around the how to make a garlic wash, so you can have a look in there, whoever had that question. But with that, Gary, I would love to pass over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. What another great show. And it is a show, and it was a show, because it is about engagement and trying to entertain whilst learning. And I every single time I come onto one of these, that's exactly what I come away feeling. Great panelists. Katie, how does one so young know so much?
I would take that as a massive compliment.
Oh man, it's fabulous. It's usually fuddy-duddy old fellas that are trying to energize and get people to do stuff. And you seem to know what you're doing. I must, when I come back again in a different body, I must be one of you, whatever it is. Peter, I loved what Peter said, and I'm ashamed he's gone, because when he said we have to redefine what beautiful looks like, I said, yeah, I'm all for that. Look at my head. I'm getting all on for that whole redefinition of beautiful. And Una, one of the things that I thought when you were talking, which is amazing, is we met you, we continue to have you on as an ally all along, because we don't want any unintended consequences. And to think that one of the unintended consequences of what we're doing is that you now have a data set for apples. That's really cool that we've turned, because I would have been all into planted flowers everywhere. But because we stopped, we listened, and now we're trying to actually do the right thing for the right reason. So thanks a million. But listen, when we started Hosting Ireland all those years ago, the whole idea was success through collaboration. End of, park your ego, park your balance sheet, and you're very welcome. If you're not, stay outside the door. So this whole DCs for Bees is really just another application of what we stand for. And it's really a great thing to be involved in. Nothing is inevitable. I'm a child born in the 60s, fed propaganda of the 80s. We were meant to be fried by the ozone by now, and we were meant to have no little pandas. Guess what? We weren't frozen zapped by the ozone because we stopped using stuff. And the panda has moved actually from the absolute endangers list to a monitored list. So nothing is inevitable. And that's what this is all about. I was at a thing recently with Mary Robinson was talking, and she said, all of what we're talking about today is way too important to leave to politicians. And my goodness, it really is true. You know, this is so important that every individual person takes something from this. When we set DCs for Bees up, we said we'd do 3 A's. We'd be advocates. We'd raise awareness. But most important, we'd take action. So when we think about the most valuable asset that we all have, no matter where we are in our age, it's time. And we've just taken an hour of your time. So we've just taken away from you the most valuable thing you have. And if you don't take action or do something after, we've all wasted everybody's time. And that's the truth. If you want to do something, have a look at downloading the Pollinator plan. There's 43 ideas in the Pollinator plan, either the national one on pollinators.ie or the DC's one on our website. 43 things from window boxes to whole campuses. Do something. Otherwise, we've all just wasted each other's time. And that's not in a bad way. You can fund. I know we're all very excited about 1,000 orchards, some more than more. I have a huge plan that is way more than 1,000 orchards. There's probably another 0 needed, to be frank, at the end of the 1,000. So if you want to fund some of the orchards or become part of the pledgers and funders and join Schneider and the other 49 partners, we need to hear from you. Or if you want to take some of the orchards, we need to hear from you. So ultimately, it's all about thank you. Thank you to Una. Thank you to Michelle. Thank you to Katie. Tanya, show yourself. Lisa, show yourself. Mira, show yourself. Come on. Come on, don't be shy. These are the people who do all the real work. And so fantastic they are. So with that, another great show. Thank you so much to everybody that's participated. Please take some action. Anything. Don't cut your grass. And if you live in Rathote, be careful. Michelle walks around Rathote late at night. And if you've cut your grass, I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a million. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome.